The ghost zone had a smell. Danny had never really thought about it before. You didn't when something was just the background texture of your life. But standing in the middle of Times Square with every billboard in a 3-block radius flickering in response to his ectoplasmic energy output, he was acutely aware that the ghost zone smelled like cold stone and ozone and something ancient that didn't have a name, and that New York City smelled like exhaust and pretzels and 8 million people, so in that the contrast between the two was so jarring that his brain was still trying to decide which reality was real. Both, technically. That had always been his answer. Both were real. He was proof of that. He was also, currently, 14 years old, alone, glowing faintly green in the middle of the most photographed intersection on the planet, and his ghost sense hadn't stopped going off since he'd landed. It wasn't the small thing. The cold wisp of breath that meant one ghost nearby and manageable. It was the whole body version, the one that happened when the ghost zone itself was close, when dimensional boundaries were thin. It was rolling through him in continuous waves, his ice-cold ghost sense responding to something vast and ambient and everywhere, like the entire universe around him was slightly haunted. Which, given what he'd accidentally learned in his 14 years of ghost fighting, might have been literally true. The portal accident replayed in fragmented sequence. Skulker's weapon, the ghost zone, a rift that shouldn't have been possible tearing open in the wrong direction, and then the sensation of being turned inside out through a gap in reality that closed behind him before Sam or Tucker could follow. Standard Danny Phantom luck, refined over 2 years of near-death experiences into something almost elegant in its consistency. He hovered 6 feet above the asphalt and tried to think, but the city around him was wrong in ways he couldn't immediately catalog. Familiar enough to register as New York, different enough that his ghost sense kept snagging on things without identifying them. The skyline had buildings he didn't recognize. The vehicles had a different design language. A tower to the north carried a letter on it that his brain tried to make sense of and couldn't quite resolve into anything from his New York. He needed to go intangible. Get above the crowd, get altitude, get a look at the situation before anyone. "Okay," said a voice directly beside him, arriving with a soft thwip of webbing on the building overhead. "I'm going to need you to not freak out, because I'm also trying to not freak out, and if we both freak out simultaneously, this is going to go badly for the hot dog cart." Danny turned, clinging to the wall of the building to his left, at approximately his eye level. It was someone in a red and blue suit with large white eye lenses that somehow managed to convey the specific expression of a person who was deeply uncertain about the situation, but committed to handling it with a positive attitude. Danny stared. Are you Spider-Man?" "That is a complicated question in the current multiverse climate," Spider-Man said. "But for practical purposes, yes." "Are you—" A pause, the white lenses shifting as he visibly tried to find a category. "Are you okay?" Because you're glowing. And my spider sense is doing something I don't have a great word for. It's not danger exactly, it's more like adjacent to danger. Danger's cousin. Danger's cousin who you've just met at a family reunion and you're not sure yet if they're fun or a problem." "I'm not a problem," Danny said automatically. "Cool. Great. That's a good start." Spider-Man dropped from the wall and landed on the asphalt in front of him, which put them at approximately the same height, which Danny found unexpectedly steadying. Someone his size, even if the suit made it hard to tell exact age. "So the glowing, is that a permanent thing, or—" Danny looked down at himself. The ghost form's luminescence was brighter than usual, the ecto-energy responding to the continuous ghost sense stimulation by running slightly hot. He concentrated, pulling it back, and the glow dimmed to something that could almost be mistaken for a weird light effect if you were being generous. "So it's fine," Danny said. "I can control it." "Okay." A beat. Spider-Man looked at the crowd that had accumulated. Phones up, videos running, the specific energy of New York City identifying something unusual and immediately beginning to document it. So here's the thing. SWORD is going to have picked up your arrival signature approximately 40 seconds ago, and their response time in Manhattan is... 3 aircraft appeared above Times Square, and descending with the coordinated precision of people who had practiced this. That, Spider-Man finished. Right. So, quick question, and I need you to answer honestly. Extra-dimensional entity, rogue experiment, or confused kid who ended up somewhere they didn't mean to be? Danny looked at the aircraft, at the crowd, at the city that was wrong in ways he was still cataloging, at Spider-Man, who had called him a kid, which meant he could see past the ghost form's slight agelessness and was reading the situation accurately. Confused kid, Danny said. Definitely the third one. Perfect, Spider-Man said, with the energy of someone relieved by this answer. Okay, I'm going to do most of the talking with SWORD. You stay close, stay visible, try to look as non-threatening as possible. Can you turn the eyes down? The green eyes are a little intimidating. I was going to say a lot to process, but sure. Danny shifted. Not fully human because he didn't know this world well enough yet to go unprotected, but he softened the ghost form's more dramatic elements, the way he'd learned to do for situations where looking like a monster wasn't useful. The glow dimmed further. His eyes shifted towards something closer to their natural blue. Spider-Man tilted his head. Better. Okay, just let me handle this. Above them, the SWORD aircraft deployed. Below them, Times Square held its breath. Danny Phantom, half ghost, 14, approximately 11-dimensional layers from home, straightened his spine, deployed the specific expression he used when Mr. Lancer was asking questions he didn't have good answers to, and decided that whatever this universe threw at him, he'd handled worse. He thought of Vlad Masters, a pariah dark, of the Disasteroid. He'd handled significantly worse. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. With great power comes great responsibility. The SWORD containment team was professional, which Danny respected, and aggressive, which he'd expected, and completely unprepared for intangibility, which was the part that complicated things. The lead agent, tall, close-cropped hair, with the specific posture of someone who had handled extra-dimensional threats before and had developed opinions about how they should be managed, came down the aircraft's deployment ramp with a scanner in one hand and the practiced calm of institutional authority in the other. Her badge read, Director Reyes. Her expression read, I have a protocol for this and I intend to use it. Extra-dimensional entity, she said, to Danny specifically, and in the tone of someone identifying a category rather than addressing a person. You are currently in violation of the Multiverse Incursion Response Act, Section 4, which requires all non-native dimensional entities to submit to immediate containment and assessment. Please land and... He's not an incursion, Spider-Man said from Danny's left, with the patient energy of someone who had made this argument before in different configurations. Look at him. He's a kid. Extra-dimensional entities can present in any... He's wearing a t-shirt under the ghost thing. You can see it. Director Reyes looked. The hazmat-style jumpsuit that constituted Danny's ghost form had, in the softened version he was currently running, a visible collar of the plain white t-shirt he'd been wearing underneath when the portal had grabbed him. It was, Danny agreed, difficult to frame as menacing. She looked back at her scanner. The readings are... A pause, with the professional composure developing a small crack. The readings are inconsistent. This device is registering him as both living human and extra-dimensional entity simultaneously. That's because he's both, Spider-Man said. That's not... Entities are either native or non-native. Living or... I'm half ghost, Danny said. Everyone looked at him. He'd made a tactical decision approximately 15 seconds ago, and during the moment, Director Reyes had looked at her scanner with the expression of someone whose instrument was failing her. The instrument was failing because the category was wrong. Sword was trying to classify him as either a person or a threat, and he was both and neither. And the fastest route through this particular version of the "you're a ghost" problem was the same route that had eventually worked with Amity Park. Information delivered plainly, before the people with the authority to make things worse had time to decide on a framework. Half human, half ghost, he continued, keeping his voice steady in the register he'd developed for situations where sounding 14 and scared was not useful. I'm from a dimension adjacent to yours. Not the same universe, a different one entirely. I got here by accident. A portal malfunction during a fight pulled me through a dimensional rift that I think intersected with something on your side. He looked at the scanner in Rhea's hand. That's probably why your readings are inconsistent. I don't fit the categories because the categories don't have a slot for what I am. Silence. The aircraft hummed above them. 2 blocks over, someone was definitely live streaming this. Half ghost? Reyes repeated. Half ghost, Danny confirmed, as Spider-Man made a small gesture with one hand that conveyed, without words, something like, I know, I'm also still processing this. Reyes looked at her scanner again, then at Danny, then at the scanner. She was doing the thing Danny had watched adults do his entire ghost-fighting career. The moment where reality was clearly contradicting the established framework, and they had to decide whether to trust the framework or trust their eyes. Most adults chose the framework. It was easier. I need to make a call, Reyes said. Okay, Danny said. She stepped back toward the aircraft. Danny watched her go, then looked at Spider-Man. Half ghost, Spider-Man said quietly. That's a real thing. Where you're from? It's a real thing where I'm from, Danny confirmed. There's a dimension called the Ghost Zone that runs parallel to the living world. Ghosts are entities that form there, usually from human emotions or memories or people who've died and have unfinished business. And I went through an experimental ghost portal when I was 12, and the accident rewrote my biology. He paused. I know how that sounds. I got my powers from a radioactive spider, Spider-Man said. I don't have a lot of room to judge origin stories. Right. Danny almost smiled. The ghost sense, the thing your spider sense was reacting to, I can feel ghosts nearby. And whatever this universe is doing, it's been triggering it constantly since I arrived. The whole place feels, he searched for the word, thin, like the walls between dimensions are already compromised. Spider-Man was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. They are. It's been a complicated few years, dimensionally. The rift I came through, Danny said. Is it closed? I don't know. Sword would have that data. Spider-Man looked at the aircraft, where Reyes was speaking quietly into a communication device. She's calling Strange. Dr. Strange. Sorcerer Supreme, handles dimensional threats, general expert on things that shouldn't exist. He's going to want to see you. Is that good or bad? Mostly good. He has a slightly alarming bedside manner, but he's good people. He'll try to understand what you are before deciding what to do about you. That's more than most people manage, Danny said. And Reyes returned from the aircraft with the expression of someone whose protocol had been officially superseded by a higher authority and who had feelings about this. Dr. Strange has requested the entity be brought to the Sanctum Sanctorum for assessment, she said. In the meantime, she looked at Danny with the directness of someone shifting from institutional response to personal address, which was a small shift, but a real one. What do I call you? Danny thought about it for exactly 1 second. In Amity Park, everyone knew. His parents knew. Jazz knew. The secret identity had gotten complicated enough that keeping it was more habit than strategy. But this was a different universe, full of people who had never heard of Fenton Works or Amity Park or the Fentons, and there was something in the size of that anonymity that felt, briefly, like a gift. He could be just Danny Phantom here. Not Danny Fenton, who had homework and a curfew and parents who built ghost hunting equipment and didn't know their son was what they were hunting. Just the hero half. Clean and uncomplicated. Danny Phantom, he said. Reyes wrote it down. The professionalism of the gesture, treating his name like data worth recording accurately, landed somewhere unexpected. All right, Danny Phantom. I'm going to ask you to come with us voluntarily, because the alternative involves a containment protocol that I suspect won't work and will make everyone's morning worse. The containment wouldn't work, Danny confirmed, not unkindly. Intangibility. I assumed. She gestured toward the aircraft. Voluntarily, then. Danny looked at Spider-Man, who gave a small nod. He floated toward the aircraft, passing through the doorframe slightly. A reflex, corrected immediately, reorienting to solid and walking through the gap the normal way. Old habit. In Amity Park, doors were optional. Here, he was a guest. Guests used doors. The aircraft rose above Times Square and Manhattan spread below them in the morning light, vast, complicated, humming with 8 million lives and the faint dimensional wrongness that Danny's ghost sense had been registering since the moment he arrived. He pressed his face slightly toward the window, looking down at the city, looking for anything that matched the New York he knew. He found some of it. Few enough to be recognizable. Not enough to be home. He was going to find the way back. He was going to fix whatever had opened the rift and get back to Sam and Tucker and his parents and Jazz and Amity Park and his actual life. But first, apparently, Dr. Strange. He hoped Strange was better with impossible things than most adults were. He thought, with the specific wry fatalism of someone who had been building that hope since age 12, that he was probably about to find out. The Sanctum Sanctorum smelled like old books and something that reminded Danny, uncomfortably, of the Ghost Zone. Not identical. The Ghost Zone had a cold, mineral quality, the smell of a place that existed outside of time and weather. The Sanctum's version was warmer, layered with wood polish and candle wax and the specific atmospheric density of a building that had been doing serious magical work for a very long time. But underneath all of that, up in the register his ghost sense operated in, rather than his human nose, there was a dimensional resonance that was deeply familiar. Thin walls. This whole universe had thin walls, and nowhere more than here. Dr. Strange met them in the main hall, which was, Danny had to work to keep his expression neutral, genuinely impressive. He'd grown up in a house where the basement contained a functional portal to a ghost dimension, so his threshold for architectural wonder was calibrated differently than most 14-year-olds. But the Sanctum's main hall, with its impossible geometry and artifacts that his ghost sense identified as genuinely, seriously powerful, registered clearly. Strange himself was not what Danny had expected. He'd expected someone who looked more like clockwork, ancient, measured, the specific stillness of someone for whom time moved differently. Strange was younger than that, sharper, wearing the cloak of levitation, with the unconscious ease of someone who had long ago stopped noticing the sentient garment rearranging itself on his shoulders. His eyes moved across Danny with the focused assessment of a man who categorized everything he saw and was currently finding Danny's category elusive. "Sit," Strange said, gesturing to a chair across from a low table covered in open books and what appeared to be active diagnostic instruments. "Please." Danny sat. The chair was normal, as he'd half expected it to be something stranger. Strange remained standing, which Danny recognized as a choice, keeping the height advantage, maintaining the framing of examiner and examined. He'd seen the same thing from the guys in white, from various ghost hunting authorities. From everyone who'd ever tried to figure out what Danny Phantom was before deciding what to do about him. He was, at 14, considerably more experienced with being examined than most people Strange had probably met. "Wong tells me your readings are inconsistent," Strange said. "Half ghost," Danny said for the second time that morning. "My biology is split between living human and ectoplasmic entity. Most instruments register one or the other and get confused by both simultaneously." Strange looked at him for a long moment. Then he raised one hand, and a diagnostic working spread from his fingertips. Orange geometric light, intricate and clearly sophisticated, moving across Danny in a slow wave. And Danny held still. He'd had worse scans. The working reached him, hit the edge of his ectoplasmic field. Strange's expression shifted. Not dramatically, a subtle recalibration, the specific adjustment of someone whose instrument was returning something unexpected. "You're producing two distinct biological signatures," Strange said slowly, reading the workings output. "One human, standard living physiology, adolescent, minor ectoplasmic contamination throughout at the cellular level. Now one extra-dimensional, consistent with what I'd classify as a spectral entity, but structured, organized. Not a residual imprint or a dimensional echo, but an active, functioning ghost," Danny said. "The word is ghost. In my experience, ghost refers to a specific spiritual remnant, unfinished business, residual haunting. I know the categories," Danny said, and caught the slight surprise in Strange's expression at the fluency. "I've been studying ghost theory since I was 12. Your categories aren't wrong, they're just incomplete. The ghost zone, the dimension I'm from, adjacent to, produces entities that don't fit the residual haunting model. They're not echoes, they're people, complicated, sometimes dangerous, occasionally trying to take over the world, but people." He paused. "Some of them, anyway." Strange was quiet. The diagnostic working continued its slow orbit, pulling data. "The ghost zone," he said. "Now describe it." "Infinite dimension running parallel to the living world. Exists outside normal time. Events from different eras of history coexist without contradiction. Populated by ghosts with distinct personalities, powers, territories. Has its own physics, its own geography, its own political structure." He considered. "Loosely. Now the political structure is mostly who's strongest wins, which causes a lot of problems. And you operate in it. I protect my town from ghosts that come through the portal. Amity Park, my hometown. My parents built the portal. A beat. They're ghost hunters. They don't know I'm half ghost. It's complicated." Strange looked at him with the specific expression of someone filing several things simultaneously. "How old are you?" 14. The diagnostic working dimmed. Strange lowered his hand. He pulled a chair from across the room, not walking to it, it simply arrived, and sat, which changed the dynamic of the room in a way Danny noticed and appreciated. Examiner to examiner, or close to it. "The dimensional rift you came through," Strange said. "I've been tracking its signature since Sword flagged your arrival, and it's consistent with a ghost zone breach point. A dimensional layer I've detected traces of before, but never been able to directly access or fully map." He picked up one of the books on the table, turned it to a marked page, and set it facing Danny. The diagram on the page showed a dimensional cross-section that was clearly someone's attempt to map layers of reality. The living world, various mystical dimensions, hell dimensions, the quantum realm's relationship to normal space. There was a gap in the architecture, a space that the diagram acknowledged but couldn't fill in. "That gap," Strange said. "I've theorized a dimensional layer there, something that doesn't interact with standard mystical framework but leaves traces. Interference patterns in certain workings. Unexplained cold spots in dimensional mapping." He looked at Danny. "The ghost zone. The ghost zone," Danny confirmed. And he studied the diagram with the eyes of someone who had spent 2 years practically navigating the space being theoretically described. Your map is close. The layer positioning is right, but the interaction model is wrong. The ghost zone doesn't just run parallel to your dimension. It runs parallel to all of them. He looked up. Every universe has a ghost zone layer. At least that's what Clockwork implied, and he's the ghost of time itself, so he tends to have accurate information about dimensional architecture. The silence that followed was the specific kind that happens when a sentence contains so much information that the listener needs a moment to process the cue. The ghost of time itself, Strange repeated. Clockwork, ancient, all-seeing, operates outside of normal temporal flow. He's actually been helpful, occasionally, when he's not being cryptic. Danny paused. Up to he's usually being cryptic. Strange stood and moved to the bookshelf, pulling 2 more volumes with the purposeful energy of someone whose intellectual interest had been fully engaged and was now operating on its own momentum. If the ghost zone exists adjacent to every universe in the multiverse, he was talking partly to himself now, the way people did when thinking out loud, then the incursion fractures we've been tracking could be creating points of intersection between ghost zone layers from different universes. Not just 2 realities colliding, but the dimensional membrane between the living world and its own ghost dimension becoming compromised in the process. That would explain the ghost sense, Danny said. Strange stopped, looked at him. It hasn't stopped going off since I arrived, Danny said. My ghost sense responds to ghost zone proximity. Normally, it's triggered by individual ghosts or the portal at home. Here, it's been continuous. If the ghost zone layer in your universe is being destabilized by whatever's happening to your multiverse. He caught Strange's expression. What's happening to your multiverse? Spider-Man said it had been complicated. Strange set the books down. He looked at Danny with the expression of someone deciding how much to explain, so performing a rapid assessment of how much this particular 14-year-old could usefully absorb versus how much would simply be frightening. Danny recognized the assessment and headed it off. I've fought ghosts that were trying to collapse dimensions since I was 12, he said flatly. I've prevented an asteroid impact. I've dealt with alternate timelines. I'm not going to panic at complicated. Strange studied him for another moment. Then, and with the decision visible in the set of his shoulders, he began to explain. He talked for 40 minutes. The multiverse structure, the incursion events, Kang's involvement, the broad architecture of it, the stakes, the damage already done and the damage being prevented. Danny listened with the focused attention he deployed when the situation was serious, asking 3 clarifying questions at points where the information didn't connect properly, filing the rest. When Strange finished, Antoine, the room was quiet. The rift I came through, Danny said. If it intersects with your incursion fractures, if ghost zone dimensional mechanics are involved in your multiverse's instability, then understanding the ghost zone becomes significantly more urgent than a purely academic interest, Strange said. And getting me home, Danny said, requires understanding the same dimensional architecture you're already trying to map. Yes, Danny nodded. Oh, okay. He looked at the diagram on the table, the gap that the ghost zone was supposed to fill. I can help with that. I've been navigating ghost zone architecture for 2 years. I know more about its physics than anyone in your universe does. He paused. In exchange, you help me find the way back. Strange looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a man who had negotiated with cosmic entities and dimensional anomalies and was finding, somewhat unexpectedly, that the most straightforward negotiation he'd had in months was with a 14-year-old in a ghost jumpsuit. Deal, Strange said. He extended his hand. Danny shook it. The cloak of levitation drifted toward Danny with the tentative energy of a curious animal, one corner lifting toward his shoulder. Danny looked at it. In the ghost zone, objects with enough emotional resonance sometimes developed a kind of sentence. Not true consciousness, but presence. Personality. And he recognized the quality. He let the cloak touch his shoulder. It patted him once, with the specific gentleness of something large and powerful being deliberately careful. "It likes you," Strange said, with what sounded like mild surprise. "I have that effect on things that exist between living and dead," Danny said. Strange almost smiled. "I'm beginning to believe that," he said, and reached for the first book. Danny was alone in the Sanctum's East Library for approximately 20 minutes before Johnny Blaze found him. Strange had stepped out to take a communication from Wong. Something about a dimensional monitoring alert on the eastern seaboard, the kind of thing that made sorcerers move with quiet urgency and not explain themselves. The cloak of levitation had stayed, draped over the back of the chair beside Danny with the contented stillness of a cat that had decided on a favorite spot. But that was the extent of Danny's company. He'd used the 20 minutes productively. The Sanctum's library, even in this one room, contained more documented dimensional theory than the entirety of Fenton Works' research archive. And Danny had spent 2 years developing the specific skill of extracting useful information quickly from sources that weren't organized for his purposes. He'd found 3 separate texts with Ghost Zone-adjacent references, incomplete, misclassified, describing the dimensional layer in terms that were wrong in the specific way that outside observation without direct experience always produced, but containing real data underneath the misinterpretation. He was deep in the 3rd text, cross-referencing against what he knew about ghost zone geography when the temperature in the room changed. Not his ghost sense temperature, not the ectoplasmic cold that meant ghost zone proximity, a different kind of cold. Older, on the temperature of something that had been burning for so long that the heat had gone all the way around into something that felt like its opposite. Danny looked up. The man in the doorway was tall, leather-jacketed, with the kind of road-worn face that suggested someone who had been moving continuously for a very long time and had stopped expecting the road to end. He wasn't transformed. No fire, no skull. Nothing overtly supernatural. But Danny's ghost sense responded to him immediately, and not with the continuous ambient signal that the universe itself was producing, but with a sharp, specific, directional alert. This was something significant, something that existed in a category adjacent to the ghost zone's architecture without being part of it. "You're not a ghost," the man said. His voice was rough, layered, carrying a resonance that suggested the human part of him was the surface of something considerably deeper. And he was looking at Danny with the specific intensity of someone whose supernatural perception was working hard and returning confusing results. "But you're not a ghost either." "Half ghost," Danny said, for the 3rd time that day. He was getting efficient at delivering it. "Half human. It's a whole thing. Half." The man, Danny's memory was pulling at something, connecting the leather jacket and the road quality and the supernatural resonance to something he'd read in passing. Stepped into the library and stood in a way that wasn't threatening but was very deliberately present. The spirit of vengeance can feel every soul that comes within range. Living souls, dead souls, souls that have passed through darkness and come back marked by it. He paused. "Your soul doesn't read right." "Ghost Rider," Danny said, the memory connecting. "No, you're Ghost Rider." "Johnny Blaze," the man said. "Ghost Rider is the other one. He's in here too." He tapped his chest, a gesture that was both literal and something else. "He's the one who flagged you. I came to see for myself." Danny processed this. The spirit of vengeance. A supernatural entity that assessed souls, that operated in the space between life and death, that had its own relationship with dimensions that existed outside the normal living world. And of all the Marvel heroes he might have encountered, Ghost Rider was simultaneously the most alarming and the one most likely to actually understand what Danny was. "What does my soul read as?" Danny asked. He was genuinely curious. He'd wondered in the abstract way that someone wonders about things that are too personal and too unanswerable to examine directly. What he looked like from the outside, from the supernatural outside. Blaze pulled the other chair from across the room, using his hands, which Danny found oddly grounding, and sat across from him. Up close, the resonance was stronger, the rider presence underneath the human exterior pressing against Danny's ghost sense like a very large thing in a relatively small container. "Half absent," Blaze said. "That's the closest I can get to it. Like, you know how a photograph of someone looks like them but isn't them? Most souls are the person. Yours is the person and the photograph simultaneously. Two complete things occupying the same space." He studied Danny with the focused attention of someone trying to articulate something at the edge of language. The rider wanted to use the penance stare. Danny went still. "What's the penance stare?" "Makes someone experience every pain they've ever caused, every innocent they've hurt. It's how we deal with people who deserve it." Blaze's expression was complicated. He couldn't do it. Couldn't. Technically could. You're within range. You have a soul. The mechanism works. He paused, choosing words carefully. "But the half that's ghost, whatever ectoplasmic energy runs through that side of you, it doesn't connect to guilt the way a normal soul does. It connects to something else. So something that doesn't translate into the penance stares framework." He looked at Danny with the expression of someone who had seen a very long list of strange things and was adding to it. "What does it connect to?" Danny thought about it honestly. He'd never tried to articulate the ghost half's emotional architecture before. It was just part of him, the way his human half was just part of him. But when he paid attention to what the ectoplasmic energy responded to, and what made it stronger or weaker, what drove it at its most powerful. "Obsession," he said. "Ghost zone entities are driven by obsessions, the core emotional truth that defines them, what they cared most about in life, or what brought them into being. For most ghosts, it's specific. Box, ghost has boxes. Ember has music. Skulker has the hunt." He looked at his own hand, the faint luminescence of the ghost form visible in the library's warm light. "Mine is protecting people. It's what I would have said was most important to me before the accident, and it's what the ghost half locked on to when it formed." He closed his hand. The penance stare couldn't connect to guilt because the ghost half doesn't run on guilt. It runs on that. Blaze was quiet for a long moment. "A ghost whose core obsession is protecting the living," he said. "Weird, right?" Danny said. "Most ghosts are trying to cause problems. I get the one that makes me want to stop them." Something shifted in Blaze's expression. Not quite a smile, something more worn than that. The specific expression of someone who had spent years in an uncomfortable relationship with a supernatural entity that had its own agenda and was slowly, grudgingly, finding the terms of coexistence. "The rider and I don't always want the same things," he said. "He wants vengeance. Most of the time, I just want to be left alone." He paused. "But sometimes, what he wants and what I want are close enough that it works." "Yeah," Danny said. "I know what that's like." The two of them sat in the library's warmth for a moment. Two people who contained supernatural entities and had complicated feelings about it, finding the specific ease of recognition between those circumstances. "The ghost zone," Blaze said. "Your dimension. The rider can feel it, the layer of it, running underneath this universe. He's always felt it, could never known what it was. Treated it as a hell dimension, which didn't map correctly, so he filed it as anomalous and moved on." He looked at Danny. "It's not a hell dimension." "No," Danny said. "Though it has some overlap. Ghost Zone has its own version of darkness. Deep entities, ancient ones that function more like what your hell dimensions describe than what most ghost zone residents are like. He thought of undergrowth, a vortex, of pariah dark. The really old ones are less like people and more like forces. They've been in the ghost zone so long that the obsession is the only thing left. The rider wants to know if there are souls in the ghost zone, Blaze said. The question was carefully phrased, neutral, asking rather than demanding. Souls that should have passed on but are still there. He paused. It's one of the things he tracks. Souls that are being held somewhere they shouldn't be. Danny hadn't thought about it in those terms before, but it was a real question. The ghost zone's population was complicated. Some residents were clearly entities that had formed there, born from emotions or memories without ever being human. But others were people who had died and simply stayed, not passed on. Danny had never fully understood the architecture of that. Some of them, he said honestly. I don't know the mechanics well enough to tell you which ones. There's someone who Clockwork might know, but I don't have access to him here. Blaze nodded slowly. That's a conversation we'll need to finish, he said. When you know more. He stood, the rider's resonance shifting as he moved, present, contained, the two natures managing their coexistence in the particular way that Danny recognized, because he managed the same thing 30 times a day. The penance stare didn't work on you, he said. But if you'd been guilty, it would have worked on the human half fine. The ghost half would have just been unaffected. What would have happened, Danny asked, if you'd tried it on someone with that much of their soul unaffected? Incomplete result, Blaze said, like trying to hold water in a hand with gaps in it. He paused at the doorway. Your ghost half protected you from the full effect without you doing anything, as you didn't choose it. I never choose it, Danny said. It just is what it is. Yeah, Blaze said with the weight of someone for whom this resonated. I know how that goes. He left. The library was quiet again, the cloak of levitation still draped over its chair, the books still open on the table. Danny sat in the aftermath of the conversation and turned the last part over in his mind. The ghost half had protected him, not as a defense he'd deployed, but as a structural feature of what he was. The obsession to protect, running so deep that it had insulated even his own soul from a supernatural force designed to bypass all defenses. He thought about what Clockwork had told him once, in one of the rare moments when the ancient ghost of time had been something other than cryptic, that Danny's nature was unique not because of the accident, but because of what the accident had found to work with. Now he was beginning to think that might apply here too. Whatever had pulled him through the dimensional rift, whatever had landed him in a universe of superheroes and cosmic threats and thin dimensional walls, it had found something specific to work with. He opened the third book again and went back to work. The Avengers assembled at 4 in the afternoon, which Danny was learning was what happened when Spider-Man sent a message marked urgent, and Strange co-signed it. The conference room at the compound was large enough that the number of people in it didn't feel crowded, which was its own kind of statement about the scale these people operated at. Danny sat at one end of the table, not the head, deliberately not the head, and he'd chosen the position that said guest rather than subject, and counted faces while trying not to look like he was counting. Captain America. Sam Wilson, he corrected himself. The shield was there, the posture was there, but the briefing material Strange had given him during the aircraft ride had been clear on the current status. Beside him, Rhodey in partial War Machine configuration, helmet retracted. Thor at the table's far end, who enormous and present in the way that people who had been the most powerful thing in most rooms for 1,000 years tended to be present. Not aggressive, just large, in the specific way that included the atmosphere around him. Bruce Banner, who had the specific energy of someone managing an internal situation continuously and had developed a kind of deliberate stillness around it. Spider-Man, still suited, who had positioned himself in the chair directly to Danny's left, with the body language of someone who had decided on a position and was holding it. And Tony Stark, standing rather than sitting, coffee in hand, looking at Danny with the expression of someone whose instruments had failed him and who had decided the appropriate response was to deploy his actual eyes instead. Strange stood at the room's front, one which placed him between Danny and the majority of the table in a way that was probably not accidental. "What we know," Strange said without preamble, "is this. Danny Phantom is 14 years old, from a universe adjacent to ours, and is biologically half human, half ghost. He arrived through a dimensional rift consistent with a ghost zone breach point that intersected with our multiverse's existing fracture network. The rift is currently," he paused, "partially closed." "Not fully." "Partially," Rhodey said. "The closure is incomplete on the ghost zone side," Strange said. "Which brings us to the second thing we know, which Danny can explain better than I can." All eyes moved to Danny. He'd prepared for this on the aircraft. Not a speech. He was bad at speeches. Jazz was the speech person in the family, but a clear sequence of information, organized for an audience that was expert in threats and needed to understand a new category quickly. "The ghost zone runs parallel to the living world," he said. "Not just your universe, every universe. It's a dimensional layer that exists adjacent to all of them simultaneously." He watched the faces process this. "The multiverse fractures you've been dealing with, the incursion events, they're not just destabilizing the boundaries between universes. They're destabilizing the boundaries between universes and their ghost zone layers. The rift I came through is one intersection point. There are probably others." "Probably," Stark said. "My ghost sense has been triggering continuously since I arrived. It responds to ghost zone proximity, individual ghosts, portal openings, dimensional thinning. The continuous signal means the ghost zone layer in your universe is compromised across a wide area, not just at the rift point." He looked at Stark directly. "Do your dimensional monitoring instruments track cold spots? My unexplained temperature drops in specific locations that don't correlate with weather or HVAC." Stark looked at Rhodey. Something passed between them. "Friday," Stark said. "Cross-referencing atmospheric temperature anomalies with dimensional monitoring data from the past 6 months," the AI responded from the room's speakers. 17 locations, clustered near established incursion fracture points, but distinct from them, and I classified them as instrument error." "They're not instrument error," Danny said. "They're ghost zone bleed-through. Places where the dimensional membrane between your universe and its ghost zone layer has become thin enough that the ghost zone's temperature bleeds through." He paused. "Which means something could come through, if it isn't already." The room was quiet with the particular quality of people absorbing information that recontextualizes existing data. "How dangerous," Sam said, "is the ghost zone as a source of threats?" Danny considered how to answer this honestly without either understating or catastrophizing. "In my universe, most ghost zone entities that come through are manageable, powerful, sometimes seriously dangerous, but contained. They have specific obsessions that limit their behavior, and once you understand the obsession, you can usually predict and counter them." He paused. "But the entities that have been in the ghost zone the longest, the ancient ones, they're different. They're less like individuals and more like forces. They don't have specific obsessions anymore, just fundamental drives. Those ones are," he searched for the right word, "significantly more dangerous." "How dangerous is significantly more dangerous?" Bruce said, with the careful precision of someone who had his own relationship with significantly more dangerous and wanted a calibrated answer. "Pariah Dark," Danny said. "The Ghost King. He was sealed away because an alliance of the most powerful ghost zone entities decided he was too dangerous to remain active. When he got out, I needed a special suit powered by a device called the ectoskeleton. which basically channeled enough ghost energy to give me the power to match him while destroying my body in the process, to seal him back. He let that sit for a moment. He's still sealed, but he's an example of the category. Thor had been quiet through this, the particular quiet of someone listening very carefully. In Asgard, he said, we have records of ancient entities that do not map to Midgardian supernatural categories. Cold, vast things that existed before the 9 realms took their current form. He looked at Danny. We believed them to be a form of primordial entity native to the spaces between realms. In the description you give, ancient ghost zone entities that have lost individual identity and become fundamental forces. Could be the same thing, Danny said. The ghost zone exists adjacent to all universes, including yours. What you're describing as spaces between realms might be what we call the ghost zone's deep regions. Thor was quiet for a moment. That is both fascinating and alarming, he said. That's ghost theory in general, Danny said, though Spider-Man made a sound that was definitely a suppressed laugh. Stark set his coffee down. Okay, he said, in the register of someone moving from information gathering to problem solving, which Danny had noticed was where Stark was most comfortable. The rift is partially open. Ghost zone dimensional membrane is compromised across multiple locations in our universe. Anything that comes through is your problem category, not ours, because we have exactly 0 framework for handling it. He looked at Danny. You do. I do, Danny said, which makes you the subject matter expert in the room for this specific threat type, Stark said. How do you feel about that? It was, Danny recognized, a genuine question, not a rhetorical setup, not a test. Stark was actually asking how Danny felt about being put in that position. The directness of it was surprising and unexpectedly decent. I've been the subject matter expert on ghost threats since I was 12, Danny said. I'm used to it. What I'm not used to is having backup. He looked around the table. In Amity Park, it's usually just me. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically. These were professional heroes. They didn't telegraph emotional responses, obviously. But it shifted. Sam's expression changed slightly. Spider-Man's posture changed. Even Stark, who had the most controlled face in the room, and he did something small with his mouth that wasn't quite what it had been a moment before. Just you, Sam said. At 14. At 12, when it started, Danny said. With 2 friends who help with research and equipment. But the actual ghost fighting part is... He shrugged, deploying the gesture he used when he wanted something to sound simpler than it was. Mostly just me. The silence that followed had a specific texture, and Danny had encountered it before. The moment when adults processed the practical reality of what his life had been and didn't quite know what to do with it. Jazz cried, the first time. His parents still didn't know. Sam and Tucker had been there from the beginning and had the particular adaptation of people who'd normalized something by living through it alongside someone else. These people weren't going to cry, but they were doing something with the information. Right, Stark said. It's breaking the silence with the focused energy of someone who processed feelings by converting them directly into action items. So, you're the ghost expert. Strange is the dimensional expert. Between the 2 of you, what do we need to do about a partially open ghost zone rift and 17 compromised membrane locations? Close the rift completely, Danny said. Map the 17 locations and monitor them for bleed-through. Establish a containment protocol for anything that comes through in the interim. He paused. And figure out why the rift didn't close fully, because a ghost zone breach point should close on its own once the initial dimensional pressure equalizes. The fact that it didn't mean something on the ghost zone side is keeping it open. Another silence. Different texture this time. Something is holding it open, Strange said quietly from the front of the room. From the ghost zone side, Danny confirmed, which means something in the ghost zone knows the rift is there. He looked at the table. and has decided it wants to stay. The room processed this. Fantastic, Stark said, with the tone of someone who had fully expected this answer and was annoyed at being right. Friday, pull up the rift's dimensional signature. Strange, I need the 17 locations on a map. And somebody. He looked at Spider-Man. Get the kid something to eat. Because I'm pretty sure he's been in the library since this morning, and that's not a sustainable operational tempo. I'm fine, Danny said automatically. You're 14, and you've been in a different universe since before breakfast, Stark said. You're getting a sandwich. This is non-negotiable. Spider-Man was already standing with the energy of someone delighted to have a concrete task. I know where the good stuff is. Come on. Danny looked at the assembled Avengers. Not at the holographic map Friday was already generating, at Strange moving to the display wall with the focused energy of a problem fully engaged. He looked at Stark, who had already moved on to the next problem with the velocity of someone for whom standing still was physically uncomfortable. He thought, these are the people who protect their universe the way I protect Amity Park. Just more of them, and with better equipment. He stood and followed Spider-Man toward the door. Phantom, Sam called from the table. Danny turned. You said you're used to doing it alone, Sam said. The shield was on the table beside him, vibranium and history, and Sam Wilson was looking at Danny with the particular directness of someone who had thought carefully about what to say and had chosen the simplest version. You're not alone here. Danny looked at him for a moment. At the table, at the map, and at the room full of people who had just reorganized their threat response framework around a 14-year-old's expertise without making him feel like a child or a specimen. Yeah, he said, I'm starting to get that. He followed Spider-Man out the door, and behind him, the Avengers got to work. The first bleed-through happened at 2:17 in the morning at location 11 of 17. Location 11 was a parking structure in Red Hook, Brooklyn. 3 levels, largely empty at that hour, the ghost zone membrane thin enough that Danny's ghost sense had ranked it second on the monitoring priority list he'd built with Strange and Friday during the previous afternoon. The sensor array Stark had deployed across all 17 locations in 6 hours. A genuinely impressive operational tempo, and even by Danny's standards, flagged it first. Temperature drop of 40 degrees Fahrenheit in 90 seconds, electromagnetic interference consistent with ectoplasmic energy output, and a visual anomaly on the parking structure's security camera that lasted 4 seconds before the camera failed entirely. Danny was awake when the alert came. He'd been awake for most of the night, partly because sleeping in a universe that his ghost sense read as continuously haunted was difficult, and partly because he'd been working through the Sanctum's library texts, cross-referencing ghost zone physics with Strange's dimensional mapping, trying to understand what was holding the original rift open. He was dressed and out the window. Habit, doors were optional and windows were faster, before the compound's duty alert had finished sounding. Spider-Man caught up with him 3 blocks from the Sanctum, to dropping from a web line to match Danny's flight altitude with the easy coordination of someone for whom aerial travel was primary locomotion. Friday flagged me. Spider-Man said, You were already gone. Ghost sense gave me 30 seconds of warning before the sensors triggered, Danny said. I've been monitoring it passively. You've been awake all night monitoring your ghost sense. I sleep light when there's an active threat, Danny said. Which was true and considerably understated the reality, which was that he'd learned to sleep in 30-minute intervals during bad ghost seasons in Amity Park, because the alternative was being caught unprepared, and the Marvel Universe's ambient supernatural signal had his system running at the same pitch as a bad ghost season. That's not... Spider-Man started, then reconsidered. We're going to talk about that later. What are we dealing with? Unknown, Danny said. The camera failed before I could see it. but the temperature drop rate and the EM signature suggest something that's been in the ghost zone long enough to have significant ectoplasmic density, not a new ghost. He focused his ghost sense, pushing it toward the red hook location, not the continuous ambient signal, but the specific directional read he used when tracking. It's still there, it hasn't moved. Is that good? Depends on why it hasn't moved. He angled his flight downward, manned the parking structure visible 2 blocks ahead. Ghosts that don't move when they could are either establishing territory or waiting for something. Neither one is great. They dropped to the structure's top level. The air was wrong immediately. Not just cold, which the sensor had flagged, but texturally wrong, the specific atmospheric quality of a space where 2-dimensional layers were occupying the same physical location. Danny had felt it 1,000 times in Amity Park, or most strongly near the portal, and the familiarity of it was simultaneously grounding and deeply strange in this context. The top level was empty of cars. Not empty of everything. The ghost was large. That was the first thing, the sheer physical scale of it, occupying the space between 2 parking structure pillars like it had grown there, or perhaps like the pillars had grown around it. And it had the indistinct quality of a ghost zone entity that had existed for a very long time without significant human interaction. Features that were present but eroding, the individual identity slowly subsuming into something more fundamental. Danny's ghost sense identified it as old, very old. Its obsession read through the ectoplasmic sense he'd developed over 2 years as space, territory, the claim of physical location as identity, and a ghost that had once been, possibly, a person who had cared deeply about belonging somewhere, about having a place, and had become, over centuries in the ghost zone, a thing that claimed spaces and couldn't release them. It looked at Danny with eyes that were pale and very bright. Ghost, it said, in the register of a category being identified rather than a greeting. Ghost, Danny confirmed, in the same register. And he'd learned early that older ghost zone entities responded better to direct acknowledgement than to human social conventions. You came through the rift. Rift was open, it said. Its voice had the layered quality of something that had been speaking for a very long time and had worn the conversational edges smooth. This place was available. This place is occupied, Danny said. The living world. It belongs to living people. Living people do not hold space correctly, the ghost said, saying with the specific displeasure of someone identifying a technical error. They move. They change. They do not claim properly. That's kind of the point of being alive, Spider-Man said quietly from Danny's right. The ghost's pale eyes moved to Spider-Man. Not ghost, it observed. Very much not, Spider-Man agreed. The eyes moved back to Danny. You are ghost, it said, and not ghost. Both, Danny said, which means I understand what you want, and I'm telling you it's not available. This dimension already has people in it. You need to go back through the rift. Rift is better than the zone, the ghost said, and something in the way it said it, the specific texture of the word better, made Danny's attention sharpen. Ghosts didn't have preferences about dimensional locations unless something had changed in the location they'd come from. What happened in the zone? He asked. The pale eyes regarded him. Old ghosts were not always communicative. The erosion of individual identity that came with extreme age in the ghost zone also eroded the impulse to explain, to share, to connect. But this one was still coherent enough to have preferences, which meant it was still coherent enough to have reasons. Something moves in the deep zone, it said. Old. Older than me. It was still before. Now it moves. The layered voice carried something that Danny, after 2 years of reading ghost emotional signatures, identified with cold certainty as fear. Many ghosts come through rifts, not only me. Danny went still. He turned to Spider-Man. "The 17 locations," he said. Spider-Man was already on his communicator. "Friday, check all 17 sensor arrays right now." A 3-second pause. 14 of 17 locations are showing active bleed-through signatures. Friday's voice came through the communicator, varying intensity. Location 7 is showing a signature consistent with multiple simultaneous entities. 14 of 17. Not one ghost using an available rift. 14 locations activating simultaneously. Something from the ghost zone's deep regions moving, pushing entities out of the zone and into the Marvel Universe through every available gap in the membrane. Danny looked at the territorial ghost, still between its pillars, watching him with pale, frightened eyes. "How old are you?" he asked. Old," it said. "Old enough to remember when the deep zone was still." "And what's moving down there?" Danny said. "How does it compare to you?" The ghost was quiet for a moment. "I'm a stone," it said finally. "What moves in the deep zone is the mountain." Danny exhaled slowly. His communicator. Stark had issued everyone on the team one during the previous afternoon's briefing, a gesture that had been practical and that Danny had recognized also as a choice, and a deliberate inclusion, activated. Stark's voice. "Phantom, are you seeing the 14 location activation?" "I'm seeing it," Danny said, "and I have a witness who just told me something very large has started moving in the ghost zone's deep regions. The ghosts aren't coming through because the rift is available." He looked at the structure around him, at the parking levels below, at the ordinary Brooklyn night beyond the concrete edges. "They're coming through because something in the deep zone is pushing them out." A pause. "How bad is that?" Danny thought of Pariah Dark, of what it had cost to seal him, of the category of entity that had existed in the ghost zone's deepest regions long enough to become something more like a fundamental force than a person, and what it might mean for that kind of entity to interact with a universe whose dimensional walls were already damaged. "Remember what I said in the briefing about the Ghost King?" Danny said. "Yes," Stark said. "At least that bad," Danny said. "Possibly worse. Because Pariah Dark was sealed away by other Ghost Zone entities working together. Whatever is moving in the Deep Zone," he looked at the territorial ghost's frightened, pale eyes, "seems to have scared all of them into leaving instead." The communicator was quiet for a moment. "Avengers, full assembly," Stark said to the broader channel. "Compound? 20 minutes. Bring coffee." Danny looked at the territorial ghost. "You can't stay here," he said, not unkindly. "But I'm not sending you back into whatever drove you out. I need you to stay, contained, not claiming anything, until I understand more about what's coming. Can you do that?" The ghost regarded him for a long moment with its pale, frightened eyes. Ancient, territorial, everything about its nature pushing it toward claiming and holding the space around it. "A ghost who is not ghost asks," it said slowly, "as one ghost to another." "As one ghost to another," Danny confirmed. Something settled in the pale eyes. "I will wait," it said, "for now." Danny turned back to the open air of the parking structure's top level, Manhattan's light-polluted sky above, the city operating in the ordinary rhythms of its middle-of-the-night life below. Deliveries, night shifts, the people who belonged to the hours when most of the world was sleeping. The 14 locations. Something vast moving in the deep ghost zone. A rift that something was deliberately keeping open. He'd faced worse odds before. He reminded himself of this with the practiced steadiness of someone who had been doing that for 2 years. He wasn't sure he believed it this time, but he said it anyway, the way you sometimes had to. He went ghost. Fully, the transformation complete. The white hair and the green eyes and the black and white suit, and all of it, and flew toward the compound. Below him, Brooklyn continued its night, unaware of what was moving in the dimension running parallel to everything. The compound's main briefing room had seen a lot of impossible things. It had survived arguments that nearly broke the Avengers apart. It had hosted plans that shouldn't have worked and did, and plans that should have worked and didn't, and at least one occasion where the fate of the universe had been decided over a time machine made from a repurposed quantum tunnel in a parking lot. It had developed, through all of this, into a kind of institutional resilience. The walls had absorbed enough impossible things that one more didn't shock them. The walls were getting a workout tonight. 14 simultaneous bleed-through events, Strange said, the holographic display behind him showing all 17 locations, 14 pulsing red, 3 amber. 7 confirmed ghost entity incursions, varying scale. The remaining 7 locations show ectoplasmic atmospheric contamination consistent with partial breach. Not full entities, but the membrane is thin enough that we're getting ghost zone environmental bleed. He looked at Danny. Your assessment of the deep zone entity, you said at least as bad as Pariah Dark. What does that mean in practical terms? Every face in the room was turned toward Danny. He was standing rather than sitting, which had happened naturally, and which he hadn't corrected because standing felt more honest right now, more appropriate to the weight of what he was about to say. He'd spent the 20 minutes since leaving Red Hook organizing his thoughts, which was the thing he did when the situation was serious enough that instinct needed the support of structure. Pariah Dark was the most powerful individual ghost zone entity I've encountered, he said. His power level was high enough that none of my existing abilities could match it directly. I needed external amplification to fight him. He looked at Stark. The ectoskeleton I mentioned was essentially a power multiplier. Without it, I couldn't have touched him. He paused. The entity that appears to be moving in the deep zone isn't necessarily more powerful than Pariah Dark in terms of raw output. It's worse than that. Worse how? Sam said. Pariah Dark was an individual. Specific obsessions, specific behaviors, predictable in the way that very powerful individuals are predictable. They want particular things, and if you understand what they want, you have a framework for countering them. Danny looked at the display, at the red pulse of 14 locations. The deep zone entities that are old enough to have lost individual identity, they don't have specific wants anymore. They have drives, fundamental ones. Claim, expand, consume. So there's no specific obsession to understand, no particular thing they're seeking that you can use to redirect them. He met Strange's eyes. You can't negotiate with a natural disaster. You can only contain it or redirect it. And the witness in Red Hook, Strange said. The territorial ghost. It described this entity as the mountain, Danny said, compared to itself as a stone. He let that sit for a moment. The territorial ghost has been in the ghost zone long enough to be losing individual definition. If that ghost is a stone and it's frightened enough of this thing to cross a dimensional rift into an unknown universe rather than stay in its home dimension. Then we have a significant problem, Thor said, with the specific understatement of someone for whom significant had a calibrated meaning. We have a significant problem, Danny confirmed. The room was quiet for a moment, and Danny let it be quiet. He'd learned that sometimes information needed breathing room before the next piece could be received. The rift, he said. The one I came through. I said something was holding it open from the ghost zone side. I think it was this entity. Not directly. I don't think it's at the rift yet. But its movement through the deep zone is generating pressure waves that are destabilizing the dimensional membrane across a wide area, including at the rift point. The rift staying open isn't deliberate choice. It's a symptom of the membrane failing, Strange said. Of the membrane failing, Danny agreed. Your multiverse's existing fracture damage has already weakened the boundary between your universe and its ghost zone layer. The entity moving through the deep zone is applying pressure to that boundary from the other side. If both forces continue, the membrane collapses entirely, Strange said. The words were quiet. carrying the specific weight of someone who understood dimensional architecture well enough to know what that meant. The ghost zone and the living universe occupying the same space. Across your entire universe, Danny said. Not just 17 locations. Everything. The silence this time was different, deeper, the kind that comes not from processing, but from the specific weight of a threat that has just come into full focus. Stark broke it. Options, he said. Now, what are the options? Danny had been building this list since Red Hook. 3. First, close the rift and reinforce the dimensional membrane before the entity reaches it. Best outcome, cleanest solution, requires understanding membrane reinforcement mechanics that Strange and I have been working on, but haven't fully solved yet. He looked at Strange. How close are we? 12 to 18 hours of additional work, Strange said, if everything goes correctly. How long before the entity reaches membrane proximity? Strange looked at the holographic display, running calculations. Based on the bleed-through acceleration rate, 6 hours, possibly less. Danny nodded, having expected this, which rules out option 1 as the primary. He continued. Second option, intercept the entity in the ghost zone before it reaches the membrane. Stop it on its own ground. He paused deliberately. Yeah, why do I feel like there's a significant problem with option 2, Sam said. Because intercepting a deep zone entity on its own ground requires entering the ghost zone, Danny said, which requires a functional portal, which I don't have here, and building one requires equipment that exists in my universe, not yours. He paused. My parents' portal took them 15 years to develop. We don't have 15 hours. Third option, Stark said, cutting to it. Stand at the membrane, Danny said. At the rift point and the 14 active locations simultaneously. When the entity's pressure wave hits, contain it at the boundary. Use the rift point as a controlled valve rather than a rupture. Channel the pressure through a single controlled opening rather than letting it burst through the membrane across your entire universe. He looked around the room. It's the least clean option. It requires holding 17 locations simultaneously against an entity-scale pressure wave. Such it means some ghost zone incursion at controlled points rather than zero incursion. But it maintains membrane integrity for the broader universe, which is the critical thing. And the ghost entity is already through, Bruce said. The 14 confirmed incursions. Need to be contained or returned before the pressure wave hits, Danny said. Because when the wave arrives, anything still on this side of the membrane that's being drawn by the entity's pull could become a vector. He stopped, and finding the simplest version of a complicated mechanism could be used as an anchor. The entity's pressure would follow the ectoplasmic trail of its own displaced ghosts back through the membrane. He looked at Bruce, which would make the incursion significantly worse. So we need to clear 14 ghost incursion sites, Sam said, and reinforce 17 membrane locations in under 6 hours with an entity the scale of a force of nature on the other side of the wall. Yes, Danny said. Sam Wilson looked at the shield on the table beside him, the look of someone consulting an internal compass. Then he looked up. How do we split the work? And that was the moment. Danny would remember it later. Specifically, the way certain moments crystallized into something you carried forward. When the room reorganized itself, not around whether to trust him, but around how to use what he knew. Sam's question wasn't directed at Strange, who was the dimensional expert. This wasn't directed at Stark, who had the resources. It was directed at Danny, because Danny was the ghost expert, and the room had decided that mattered more right now than the fact that he was 14. Danny pulled up Friday's location map on the display. Ghost incursion sites need someone who can contain or communicate with ghost zone entities. Most conventional weaponry won't be effective. Ghosts are partially intangible. Energy-based attacks work better than physical ones. And the most effective counter is understanding the obsession and using it. He looked at Thor. Asgardian lightning is ectoplasmic energy adjacent enough that it should be effective against ghost zone entities. You and Spider-Man take locations 1 through 5. Spider-Man's speed covers ground. Your lightning covers the ghost. Thor nodded once, the simplicity of a professional receiving clear instruction. Locations 6 through 10, Danny continued. Need the strongest containment grid we have. Strange. Can you establish dimensional containment fields at 5 locations in 4 hours? 3.5, Strange said. Then locations 6 through 10 are yours. 11 through 14? He looked at Sam and Rhodey. Need mobility and firepower. War Machine's repulsors operate in the right energy spectrum to affect ectoplasmic entities. Sam, your maneuverability covers the communication and coordination between sites. And the rift point, Stark said. Location 0, the original breach. That's the critical one. The entity's pressure wave is going to hit hardest there. Yes, Danny said. That's your location, Stark said. It wasn't a question. That's my location, Danny confirmed, because closing it or channeling the pressure wave through it safely requires ghost zone mechanics that only I can perform. And because, he paused, the entity will recognize ghost zone ectoplasmic energy before anything else. I'm the best anchor for the containment at the source point. You're not doing it alone, Stark said immediately. I'll be at location 0 with you. Stark. Non-negotiable, Stark said, with the specific register of someone who had made a decision and was informing rather than discussing. Friday's already modeled the ectoplasmic energy interaction with repulsor tech. There's a frequency adaptation I can run that should make the suit's output compatible with ghost zone mechanics. It won't be as effective as your native ability, but it gives us redundancy at the critical point. He looked at Danny. You're the expert, I'm the backup. That's the arrangement. Danny looked at him. He thought of Amity Park, of every time he'd gone into a ghost fight alone because there was no one else, and of the specific exhaustion of being the only line of defense for a town that didn't fully know it needed defending. Okay, he said. That's the arrangement. Stark nodded, already turning to Friday. Pull the ectoplasmic frequency data. Start the repulsor adaptation, and someone get the kid a proper mission suit. The jumpsuit is fine, but I want him in something with integrated communication and atmospheric monitoring. The jumpsuit is actually my ghost form, Danny said. No, it's part of my biology. A beat. Of course it is, Stark said without breaking stride. Friday, disregard the suit note. Everything else, go. He looked around the room. 5 hours and 40 minutes. Move. The room moved. Danny stood for a moment in the organized velocity of the Avengers assembling for a mission, watching people who had done this enough times to have developed a shared operational rhythm, the specific efficiency of a team that trusted each other's competence completely, even when they disagreed about everything else. He thought about what Sam had said in the earlier briefing. You're not alone here. He was beginning to understand it not as reassurance, but as operational fact. Not a comfort, a resource. And the difference between those two things was something he'd never had the chance to learn in Amity Park, and he filed it away carefully, the way he filed things that would matter later. Then he went ghost, fully, and got to work. The rift point was in the Hudson River, not at the surface, 40 feet down, suspended in the water like a wound that hadn't decided whether to close or was hidden, its edges flickering with the specific luminescence of ghost zone dimensional energy, bleeding into a space that hadn't been built for it. The water around it had dropped to near freezing in a 12-foot radius, and from the surface, it looked like nothing. A cold spot, a slight disturbance in the current, the kind of thing a passing boat would register as instrument error and move on from. Danny hovered above the surface, ghost form fully active, looking down through the water with the ectoplasmic vision that the ghost half provided and that he'd never fully figured out how to explain to anyone. Not quite seeing through the water, more like feeling the dimensional signature below it with a sense that didn't have a proper human name. The rift was larger than it had been, so not dramatically. Not the visible expansion of something tearing open quickly. The slow, incremental widening of something being pushed from the other side by a force that didn't need to hurry because it had all the time that existed, and then some. Friday's got the rift mapped from the satellite data, Stark said, dropping to hover position beside him in the Mark L, water sheeting off the suit's surface from the brief submersion he'd used to place the sensor array. It's expanded 14% since the Red Hook incident. Rate of expansion is accelerating. The entity is getting closer to the membrane, Danny said. The pressure wave increases as it approaches. How long? Danny's ghost sense was doing something it had never done before. Not the continuous ambient signal of a universe with thin dimensional walls, not the directional alert of a specific ghost nearby, but a deep, structural resonance, like hearing a very large sound from very far away. And the kind of sound that you felt in the architecture of the building rather than heard with your ears. 90 minutes, he said. Maybe less. It's moving faster than the bleed-through rate suggested. The communicator activated. Sam's voice. Locations 1 through 5. Clear. Thor and Spider-Man contained 4 entities. 5th one cooperated voluntarily when Danny's territorial ghost vouched for the situation. Danny almost smiled. That he'd asked the territorial ghost, still waiting in its Red Hook parking structure, honoring the agreement, to serve as an intermediary with the other displaced entities. Ghost to ghost, the acknowledgement of shared circumstance cutting through the communication barriers that would have made human or Avenger outreach significantly slower. It had worked better than he'd expected. Locations 6 through 10, containment fields established. Strange's voice followed. I'm holding them, but the membrane pressure is increasing. Whatever is on the other side is already affecting the fields. They're working harder than they should be at this distance. 14 and 15 showing secondary bleed-through. Rhodey cut in. New incursions, smaller entities, moving fast. Sam, on it, Sam said. The sound of wings in the background. The clean efficiency of someone who moved fast and thought faster. But Danny tracked the communicator traffic with one part of his attention and kept the larger part focused on the rift below, on the pressure wave's approach, on the dimensional geometry of what was coming and what could be done about it. The plan, in its cleanest form, was this. When the entity's pressure wave hit the membrane at the rift point, Danny would use his own ectoplasmic energy to widen the rift deliberately, controlled expansion, creating a valve rather than a rupture, and channel the pressure wave through the opening in a directed burst rather than letting it shatter the membrane across 17 locations simultaneously. The directed burst would be significant. It would be, essentially, taking the full force of a deep zone entity's pressure wave through a hole that he controlled and pointed somewhere that wasn't the Marvel Universe's inhabited space. The somewhere was the problem. Strange, Danny said, took into the communicator. The directed burst, if I channel it through the rift, it has to go somewhere on the other side. Back into the ghost zone in the direction it came from isn't possible. That's pointing it directly at the entity, perpendicular to the entity's approach vector. Is an uninhabited region of ghost zone dimensional space? Strange said, catching the question immediately. I've been mapping the ghost zone geometry from your descriptions and the bleed-through signatures. Now, there's a deep region sector that shows no ectoplasmic entity signatures, no territorial claims, no habitation. Clockwork would call it the uncharted realms, Danny said. The parts of the ghost zone so far from any anchor point that even ancient entities don't claim them. Yes, he exhaled. If the directed burst hits there, the energy disperses without anyone in the path. There's a geometry problem, Strange said. Channeling the burst in that specific direction requires the rift to be oriented correctly at the moment of impact. The rift's current orientation points toward the entity's approach vector. That's why it's expanding. To reorient it for the uncharted realms direction, someone needs to apply rotational force to the dimensional aperture from the inside. A pause in the communicator traffic. From inside the rift, Stark said. From inside the rift, Strange confirmed. During an active pressure wave impact. Another pause. I can do it, Danny said. Danny, Stark started. I can go intangible through the rift's interior, Danny said. Ghost zone space doesn't damage me the way it would anyone else. My ectoplasmic biology is native to that environment. I enter the rift, apply rotational pressure to the aperture from inside, reorient it to the uncharted realms vector, and get out before the pressure wave arrives. He ran the geometry in his head, at the 6 eyes equivalent that his ghost sense provided. Not as precise, not as comprehensive, but trained by 2 years of navigating ghost zone dimensional space by feel. I have a window of about 40 seconds once the wave's leading edge hits the outer membrane. 40 seconds inside the rift to complete the reorientation and exit. And if the wave hits while you're inside, Stark said. Danny didn't answer immediately. The honest answer was complicated. The ectoplasmic biology would survive the wave, he said carefully. The human biology is less certain. There are things in the ghost zone's deep regions that interact with living tissue in ways that are... He stopped. 40 seconds is enough. I won't be inside when the wave hits. That's not a complete answer, Stark said. No, Danny agreed. It's not. The communicator was quiet for 3 seconds. Danny watched the rift below, its slow expansion, and the luminescence at its edges brightening as the pressure from the other side increased. I'm going in with you, Stark said. The suit can't survive ghost zone interior space during an active pressure wave. Then I'll be at the rift's edge, Stark said, with the flat certainty of someone who had decided and was not revisiting it. If your 40 seconds runs long, I'm the anchor point. You hold on to the tether I pull. A beat. Non-negotiable. Danny looked at the water. Was at the rift's luminescence below it. Non-negotiable, he said. Okay. They went over the geometry 3 more times. Danny talking, Strange confirming, Stark running Friday's models against each iteration. The reorientation mechanics were precise and unforgiving. Too much rotational force and the rift's aperture would destabilize entirely, which was worse than the membrane rupture. Too little and the burst would only partially redirect, and the remainder hitting the membrane at the 14 remaining locations with the concentrated force of a pressure wave that had been compressed rather than fully channeled. You'll feel the aperture's resistance, Danny said, as much to himself as to Stark, organizing the muscle memory of ghost zone navigation into language. It'll push back. Ghost zone dimensional apertures want to maintain their current orientation. That's why the rift has been pointing at the entity's approach vector. It's been held in that position by the pressure itself. Reorienting against that resistance is like... He searched for the comparison. Like turning a ship's wheel against a current. The current is the entity's pressure. The wheel is me. And the 40 seconds, Stark said. What does that feel like from inside? I don't know, Danny said honestly. I've entered rift spaces before, but not during an active pressure wave impact. I know the theory of what it should feel like. The practice might be different. The practice usually is, Stark said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't reassurance exactly. Something more honest than reassurance. The acknowledgement of someone who had done enough impossible things to know that the gap between theory and practice was where you found out what you were made of. 60 minutes, Friday said, from the suite's external speaker. Below them, the rift's luminescence brightened by another degree. The Hudson's surface shivered. Not from current, from the pressure wave's advanced signal, the leading edge of something vast moving toward a boundary it had been pushing for longer than Danny had been alive. Danny's ghost sense roared. Not the continuous ambient signal, not the directional alert. The full body, structural resonance of something enormous arriving at the threshold of his perception. The kind of signal his ghost sense had only ever produced twice before, and on both times he'd needed everything he had to survive what followed. "It's accelerating," he said. "How long?" Stark said. Danny watched the rift's luminescence, felt the pressure wave's leading edge moving through the ghost zone membrane like sound through a wall. Present, advancing, unambiguous. 30 minutes, he said. It moved faster than the models predicted. It's been accelerating the whole time, and we were measuring from the early data. Strange, Stark said immediately. I'm into the communicator. I heard, Strange said. The containment fields will hold for 30 minutes. I've reinforced them. A pause. The particular quality of someone managing multiple things simultaneously. The territorial ghost. It's moved from Red Hook. It's at the rift location. Danny turned. The territorial ghost was there, hovering at the water's surface 10 meters away, pale, frightened eyes watching the rift's luminescence below. It had come, on its own, from Red Hook, but not because Danny had asked, because it had decided to. Why are you here? Danny said, not as a challenge, as a genuine question asked ghost to ghost. You asked me to wait, the territorial ghost said. You kept your agreement. I keep mine. The pale eyes moved to the rift. I know this pressure. I ran from it. Running was... It stopped. Not correct. Danny looked at it for a long moment. An ancient ghost that had existed so long it was losing individual definition, that had been frightened enough to cross a dimensional barrier into an unknown universe, that had agreed to wait on the word of a half-ghost 14-year-old it had known for 6 hours. Coming back, on its own, to honor an agreement. I'm going inside the rift, Danny said, to reorient it. When I'm inside, the rift's external membrane will be unanchored. The reorientation removes the pressure vector that's been holding its shape. If the external membrane destabilizes while I'm inside, I will hold it, the territorial ghost said. Danny stared at it. Territory, the ghost said, as though this explained everything. Because for it did. Its fundamental obsession, the core of what it was, the drive that had survived centuries of ghost zone existence, was the claiming and holding of space. And it had just claimed this rift, this patch of Hudson River, this boundary point between its home dimension and the world it had fled to. You'll hold the membrane, Danny said. I will hold it, the territorial ghost confirmed, with the absolute certainty of something that had been holding things for longer than Danny could conceive of. Stark had been listening. Is that... he started. Yes, Danny said. That's good. That's very good. He looked at the territorial ghost. Thank you. The pale eyes regarded him. Ghost who is not ghost, it said, who asks as one ghost to another. I remember how to hold. Something moved in the ancient face. Not quite a smile. Something older than smiling, the specific expression of an entity reconnecting with its own fundamental nature after a very long time spent running from it. Go, Danny went. The rift's interior was cold in the way that the ghost zone's deep regions were cold. Not temperature exactly, but the absence of the warmth that living things generated, and the fundamental chill of a space that existed outside the mechanisms that produced heat. He'd felt it before, in the deep zone, on the rare occasions ghost fighting had taken him far from the anchor points. The reorientation took 22 seconds. It felt like much longer. The aperture's resistance was exactly what he described to Stark. A current, and the entity's pressure wave pressing the rift's orientation toward the approach vector with the insistence of something that had been doing this for a very long time. Danny pressed back, feeling the dimensional geometry under his hands, the way he felt ectoplasmic energy. Not physically, but absolutely. the ghost sense operating in its most precise register. The aperture moved. Slowly, and then with increasing commitment as the resistance pattern found its edge. The point where the entity's pressure was working against the rift's structural tendency rather than with it, and Danny's force was working with that tendency. Like finding the grain of wood, like knowing which way the current wanted to turn. The uncharted realms vector locked in. Danny exited the rift with 7 seconds to spare, breaking the water's surface and shooting upward into open air. The ghost form's velocity maxed, getting clear of the impact zone with the specific urgency of someone who knew exactly how much margin they had and wasn't wasting any of it. The pressure wave hit. The pressure wave hitting the reoriented rift sounded like nothing. That was the wrong part. The part Danny's brain kept returning to in the seconds immediately after, hovering above the Hudson with water streaming off the ghost form, watching the rift's luminescence below spike to a blinding intensity and then begin, slowly, to dim. It should have been loud, and everything about the scale of what had just passed through the dimensional aperture suggested catastrophic noise. The kind of sound that rearranged the geography around it, that left structural evidence in every surface within range. Instead, silence. The particular silence of an event that operated at a frequency beyond what the air could carry. The Hudson's surface had gone perfectly flat, and the water pressed down by a pressure wave that had moved through a dimension running parallel to it rather than through the physical space itself. Every sensor Stark had deployed in the river was gone. Not destroyed, Friday reported. Simply unresponsive, the electronics reset to zero by a passing force that hadn't targeted them and hadn't needed to. The territorial ghost was still at the membrane's edge, holding it. The pale eyes were different than they'd been before. Not frightened, no, not the ancient eroding consciousness Danny had read when they'd first met. Something older was present in them now, something that had been underneath the fear all along and had surfaced when the wave hit the membrane. The absolute, fundamental nature of something that had claimed this space and was not releasing it. The territorial ghost had held the rift's external membrane through the full force of a deep zone pressure wave, and it was still holding, and it looked like it could hold indefinitely, because holding was what it was, down to the last coherent part of its identity. Wave passed, Friday said, into the communicator, the AI's voice carrying the specific quality of instruments returning data that exceeded their calibration range and were reporting it anyway. Ghost zone rift orientation confirmed, uncharted realms vector. Pressure differential across all 17 membrane locations returning to baseline. A pause. Membrane integrity at 94%. Localized reinforcement required at 3 secondary locations, but no critical failures. Danny exhaled, slowly, completely. Strange, he said into the communicator. Containment fields held, Strange said, and the 3 words carried the weight of 40 minutes of sustained effort and a genuine uncertainty about whether they would. The pressure reduction was immediate when the wave channeled through the rift. Suck whatever you did inside. Reorientation worked, Danny said. The burst hit the uncharted realms. No occupied ghost zone territory in the path. A pause across the communicator network. The collective exhale of people distributed across 17 locations who had been holding something and could now release it. Locations 1 through 5, clear and stable, Thor said, his voice carrying the particular resonance of someone who had been conducting significant amounts of lightning at ghost entities for the past 30 minutes and found it adequately engaging. Spider-Man is... where are you? Location 4, still, Spider-Man said, slightly out of breath. The ghost here is being weird about leaving. It keeps trying to claim my web shooters as territory. Tell it the web shooters are already claimed, Danny said. Very specifically and personally claimed. Obsession level claimed. Ghost zone entities respect territorial precedent. A brief pause. That actually worked, Spider-Man said, with the surprised delight of someone filed this as unexpected and effective simultaneously. It's backing off. Okay, location 4 clear. 14 and 15 stable, Rhodey said. The secondary incursions dispersed when the pressure wave passed. Whatever was driving them through pulled back. The entity retreating, Danny said, and the pressure wave was its leading force. When it channeled through the rift rather than rupturing the membrane, the entity lost the momentum it needed to continue the approach. It's not gone, but it's retreated into the deep zone. For now, Sam said. For now, Danny confirmed. He looked down at the rift. The luminescence had dimmed significantly, from the blinding intensity of the wave's passage to something closer to the steady glow of a stable, if damaged, dimensional aperture. Not closed, not fully healed, but contained, oriented safely, the membrane around it, holding at the territorial ghost's insistence. Stark dropped to hover position beside him, the Mark L's faceplate open, and looked at the water. Friday's modeling the rift closure timeline, he said. With the pressure wave gone and the membrane reinforced, natural closure should take 48 to 72 hours, Danny said. Ghost zone breach points close on their own once the dimensional pressure equalizes. Without something actively holding it open, it'll seal. And the territorial ghost. Danny looked at the ghost, still at the membrane's edge, pale eyes now watching the rift with the focused attention of something that had claimed this space and was monitoring it. I'll ask it to hold until the membrane fully stabilizes, he said. Then it can... He paused. It came through because something drove it out of the ghost zone. If the entity's retreated, it could go back, but I don't know if it wants to. Does it have a choice? Stark asked. Not dismissively. Genuine question, the specific directness of someone who wanted to understand the actual mechanics. In my world, ghosts that come through the portal go back, Danny said slowly. That's the rule. The ghost zone is their home, the living world isn't. But, he looked at the territorial ghost, so at the ancient consciousness reconnecting with its fundamental nature through the act of holding something, at the fear that had been in those pale eyes in Red Hook and was absent now. The rule exists because the living world isn't built for ghost zone entities. They destabilize things just by being here. The longer they stay, the more the membrane around them thins. He paused, but this one just held a pressure wave that would have ruptured your universe's dimensional membrane. That's not destabilization. That's the opposite. Stark looked at him. You're not sure what the rule should be here. I'm not sure what any of the rules should be here, Danny said. This universe doesn't have the same framework mine does. The ghost zone's relationship to your universe is different from its relationship to mine. Your multiverse fractures, your incursion damage, it's all changed the membrane dynamics in ways that the standard rules don't account for. He looked at the rift. I've been applying the principles I know because they're what I have. But this isn't Amity Park. The situation is different enough that some of the principles might need to be different too. Stark was quiet for a moment. The Mark L systems hummed at a maintenance level, the water below them flat and strange and cold. You know what that sounds like? Stark said. What? Someone who's been doing this long enough to know when the rules they started with aren't sufficient anymore, Stark said. And who's honest enough to say so instead of just applying the old rules and hoping? He looked at Danny with the expression he'd been developing over the past days. The one that had started as assessment and had become something more like the specific attention someone gave to a person they decided was worth paying attention to. That's not a 14-year-old thing. That's an experience thing, the kind that usually takes people a lot longer to develop. Danny didn't answer immediately, since he'd been told he was mature for his age before. Jazz said it, Tucker said it, even his parents occasionally, in the moments when they were looking at him rather than through him. He'd always filed it as something people said when they meant you've had it harder than you should have. And looking at Stark, At someone who had built his first suit in a cave and had spent 15 years learning that intelligence without wisdom was just a faster way to cause damage. Danny thought maybe it meant something different than that. Maybe it meant you've learned what the hard things teach, and that's separate from how long you've been alive. Strange said the return path, Danny said, moving to it because the weight of the moment needed somewhere practical to go. The dimensional work for getting me home. How close is it? He's been running calculations between containment field maintenance for the past 3 hours, Stark said. He said, the communicator activated before he finished. I'm close, Strange said, from wherever he was managing the membrane reinforcement work. He'd clearly been listening. The wave passage actually helped. The rift's reorientation and the controlled burst gave me dimensional data I couldn't have generated artificially. Now, the return pathway geometry is approximately 80% complete. A pause. 24 hours. Maybe less. Danny looked at the rift's dimming luminescence below. 24 hours. Then home, Sam and Tucker, who had watched him get pulled through and had been sitting with that for however long it had been on the Amity Park side. His parents, who didn't know. Jazz, who definitely knew something was wrong because Jazz always knew. His town, his portal, his life. The wave of relief was real and complicated simultaneously because relief at going home meant acknowledging what leaving here would mean, and that was a feeling he wasn't fully prepared to examine in the middle of the Hudson River. Okay, he said. 24 hours. There's something else, Strange said. The particular quality of his pause indicated something that had been held back during the operational crisis and was now surfacing. To the territorial ghost and the other displaced entities. When you go home, the question of what happens to them doesn't resolve. They can't stay here indefinitely, but returning them to a ghost zone with an active deep zone entity threat isn't correct, the territorial ghost said, from its position at the membrane's edge. Its voice carried clearly across the water, and Danny realized that it had been listening the entire time. We do not go back. Not until the deep zone is still again. Strange was silent for a moment, which means they need somewhere to be, and the membrane here can't support long-term ghost zone entity habitation without degrading further, Danny said. Yes. He looked at the territorial ghost, at the problem that was real and didn't have a clean solution. In the ghost zone, there are neutral territories, spaces that aren't claimed by any major entity, that function as transit zones or refuge areas. If the membrane could be locally reinforced at a specific location, something analogous to a neutral territory could be established here, temporarily, until the deep zone entity retreats far enough that return is viable. I can reinforce a localized membrane zone, Strange said slowly. The dimensional mechanics are consistent with what I've been doing with the containment fields, just permanent rather than temporary. It would need to be somewhere without significant civilian presence, and without active ley line intersections that could be disrupted by sustained ghost zone proximity. I know a place, Stark said. Everyone waited. Decommissioned SHIELD facility in upstate New York, Stark said. Been sitting empty since the fall of SHIELD. No civilian proximity, no active mystical geography, good structural foundation for permanent reinforcement work. He paused. I'll deed it. Strange can do the membrane work. Do the ghosts get a temporary refuge that doesn't compromise the broader membrane stability? Danny stared at him. What? Stark said. I own a lot of real estate. Some of it might as well be useful. He closed the Markel's faceplate. Friday, start the facility assessment. Strange, I'll send you the coordinates. He looked at Danny through the suite's eye lenses, the gesture carrying the specific quality of someone who wanted to say something and was choosing the practical version of it. You're going home tomorrow. The problems you leave behind don't go away. Best we can do is set them up correctly before you go. Danny looked at the territorial ghost, at the rift, at the flat, cold Hudson below, at the Manhattan skyline beyond it. This universe's version of a city he half knew, full of people he'd known for days and would remember for significantly longer. "Best we can do," he said. "Yeah." The communicator came alive with the various threads of the operation closing. Spider-Man at Location 4, Thor wrapping the northern sites, Sam and Rhodey returning from the secondary incursions, Strange beginning the membrane reinforcement calculations. The machinery of the Avengers processing the aftermath of a crisis, which was its own kind of efficiency. People who had been doing this long enough to know that the work didn't stop when the immediate danger passed. Danny listened to it and thought about 24 hours and about going home and about a territorial ghost that had held a pressure wave because it had made a promise, and about the distance between running from something and turning back to face it, and about how sometimes the most important things you learned weren't the ones you went looking for. He was 14. He'd been fighting ghosts for 2 years. He was going to go home tomorrow and go back to protecting Amity Park, alone. Share with Tucker's tech support and Sam's research and the weight of a secret identity and parents who built weapons to hunt what their son was. He was going to do it differently than he had before. He wasn't entirely sure how yet. But the thing Stark had said, someone who knows when the rules they started with aren't sufficient anymore, sat in his chest like a compass point, orienting towards something he didn't have language for yet but would. 24 hours. He went ghost. Fully, and flew back toward the sanctum. Below him, the Hudson's surface settled into its ordinary rhythms, the cold spot at Location 0 already warming by degrees as the rift continued its slow, natural closure, the territorial ghost holding the membrane steady, ancient and patient, and no longer afraid. The return portal opened at 6:14 in the morning in Kamar-Taj's central courtyard, in the specific quality of early light that made Old Stone look like it had been there since before the concept of time had been fully worked out. Strange had been awake for all of the 24 hours. It didn't show in the way it would have shown on most people, not in coordination or clarity, which remained sharp, but in something subtler, a kind of economy of movement that came from a body conserving what it had. He'd finished the portal geometry at 4 a.m. and spent the remaining 2 hours running verification sequences with the focused patience of someone who understood that this particular calculation had no margin for acceptable error. Danny had slept for 6 of the 24 hours, which was more than he'd managed on most bad ghost seasons in Amity Park. He had spent the rest in the library and in the courtyard, and in one long conversation with the territorial ghost at the decommissioned SHIELD facility that Stark's team had begun reinforcing with Strange's membrane specifications overnight. A strange, quiet conversation about what it meant to claim a space, about the difference between territory and home, about whether something that had existed for centuries could still choose to be different than what it had become. The territorial ghost had listened, had not answered directly, had said at the end that it would think about it for a while, which for something with the ghost zone's relationship to time could mean anything from an hour to a geological epoch, but which Danny had decided to take as a positive sign. The portal shimmered. Through it, the inside of Fenton Works, recognizable immediately. The specific chaos of his parents' laboratory, the persistent green glow of the secondary portal screen, the smell of ectoplasm and soldering iron, and the particular domestic warmth of a house that was also a ghost research facility and had long since stopped distinguishing between the two. Home. Specifically, exactly, unmistakably home. Danny stood in front of it and didn't go through immediately, which he hadn't planned but which felt correct. The Avengers had assembled, which also hadn't been planned. Not formally, not announced. And they'd simply arrived in the courtyard over the course of the previous hour, in ones and twos, with the organic coordination of people who had decided independently that this particular departure was worth being present for. Thor was there, Stormbreaker leaning against the courtyard wall. Sam in the Falcon's suit with the wings folded, standing with the easy stillness of someone comfortable in their own presence. Rhodey, in partial armor, talking quietly with Bruce, who had brought coffee and distributed it without making an event of it. Spider-Man, suited but relaxed, perched on the courtyard wall with the specific energy of someone who had decided they wanted to be here and had organized everything else around that decision. Stark stood to one side, not in armor, which Danny had come to recognize as his version of a formal gesture. The deliberate absence of the suit's social distance, choosing to show up as the person rather than the Iron Man. And Strange was at the portal's edge, monitoring the dimensional stability with a diagnostic working that he kept casual, which took more effort than the intensive version and which was therefore its own kind of gift. Johnny Blaze had come. He stood at the courtyard's edge, leather jacket, road-worn face, the rider's resonance present and contained. He'd arrived without announcement and hadn't explained himself, which Danny had come to understand was simply how he operated. And which felt right. The Ghost Rider showing up for a half-ghost's departure without framing it as a significant thing, just being there because he'd decided to be. The cloak of levitation was present, which had not surprised anyone. It had been following Danny at a respectful distance since his second day in the sanctum, with the affectionate persistence of something that had made a decision about a person and intended to honor it. It drifted in the courtyard's morning light, neither approaching nor retreating, simply being present in the way it had been present for 3 days. Danny looked at all of it, at the portal and its familiar green light, at the courtyard full of people who had known him for 8 days and had treated him, after the initial containment attempt and the instrument failures and the sword protocol that couldn't be completed, with a seriousness that had nothing to do with his age and everything to do with what he'd actually done. Then we thought about how to say what he wanted to say and decided the cleaner version was better. "I came here by accident," he said, to the courtyard generally, to no one specifically. "I didn't know this universe existed. I didn't know any of this was possible." He paused. "I've been protecting Amity Park for 2 years, and in 2 years I've never had backup. Not real backup. Sam and Tucker always, but that's different. They're..." He stopped. "They're everything. But they're not this." He gestured at the courtyard, at the assembled people, at the specific thing that the Avengers were when they were at their best. Which was not when they were fighting, he'd decided, but when they were in a courtyard at 6 in the morning because someone they'd known for 8 days was going home, and it had occurred to all of them independently that being here mattered. "I don't know how to do this without going alone," he said. "I don't know what it looks like to protect something with people rather than just being the person who does it. But I'm going to figure that out." He looked at Sam specifically, because Sam was the one who had said, "You're not alone here," and because the words had meant something then and meant something different now that he understood what they'd been pointing toward. "I'm going to figure that out when I get home." Sam nodded. Simple. Clean. And the nod of someone who had been saying that for years about his own parallel version of the same thing and who recognized the moment of someone choosing it for the first time. "The Ghost Zone dimensional data," Strange said, with the practical precision that Danny had come to understand, was how Strange expressed things that mattered to him. Through the work, through the problem, through the thing he could actually do with what he felt. The architecture mapping we developed together, and I'm going to continue working on it. The relationship between Ghost Zone layers and multiverse stability it's significant. It matters for what we're trying to understand here." He paused. "If Clockwork is willing to communicate across dimensional barriers." "He does things on his own timeline," Danny said. "Literally. But I'll ask." He paused. He might say yes. He knows what this universe's dimensional situation means for the Ghost Zone. He's been watching. He looked at Strange. "He's always watching." "Of course he is," Strange said, with the tone of someone filing this information next to all the other information about vast ancient entities that operated outside of normal temporal flow, and had their own agendas that occasionally aligned with the living world's interests. If he's willing, the communication channel, strange to Danny, should be maintainable through the same dimensional architecture as the return portal. The membrane work we've done here has left traces, accessible points. He held out a small object, a piece of sanctum architecture, a fragment of something that had absorbed 3 days of combined cursed energy and mystical arts workings, warm in a way that stone wasn't supposed to be warm. Keep this. If you need to reach this universe, or if something requires reaching you, it'll serve as a reference point. Danny took it, though it hummed faintly against his palm in the frequency of the ghost zone, not his ghost zone specifically, but the Marvel Universe's adjacent layer, the one he'd spent 8 days helping to stabilize. A piece of one universe held by someone from another. He pocketed it. Stark stepped forward. He had something in his hand, a small device, flat Stark Industries minimalism in its most refined form. Ectoplasmic frequency scanner, he said, tuned to the ghost zone signatures we mapped. It'll detect membrane thinning, bleed-through events, dimensional pressure consistent with what we saw at the 17 locations. He held it out. For Amity Park. Better instruments than whatever your parents have built. Danny looked at it. My parents have built some genuinely impressive instruments, he said. I know, Stark said. I read the sword file on Fenton Works. Your parents are extraordinary engineers. He paused. The instruments are still better. Take it. Danny took it. And the weight of it was familiar in the way that useful objects were familiar. Tools that fit their purpose, that had been made by someone who understood what the purpose actually was. One more thing, Stark said. He looked at Danny with the expression that had been developing since the morning after the compound incident. The one that had started as recalibrating assessment of a variable and had become something more personal. When you figure out how to do it with people instead of alone, if you need a template, there are worse ones than the people in this courtyard. He paused. We didn't start out knowing how to do it either. It took us... He stopped, and something moved briefly in his expression that was complicated and real. It took us significant failure before we got it approximately right. You don't have to repeat all of it. Danny looked at him for a moment. At Tony Stark, and who had been the smartest and the most capable and the most alone, and who had learned, at significant cost, that smartest and most capable and most alone was a trajectory, not a destination. Okay, Danny said. I won't. He looked around the courtyard one last time, at all of it. At the cloak of levitation, which drifted forward in the final moment and touched his shoulder once. The same careful pat as the first day, the gesture of something large and powerful being deliberately gentle, and then withdrew. At Blaze, who raised one hand from the courtyard's edge. Not a wave exactly, an acknowledgement. The gesture of one person who contained a supernatural entity to another across the specific understanding of that experience. At Spider-Man, who said from the wall, if you ever end up in another universe accidentally, hope it's this one again. Same, Danny said, and meant it. He turned to the portal. Through it, Fenton Works glowed green and familiar and exactly right. The sounds of his universe's morning beginning to filter through. A car on the street outside, the hum of the secondary portal's power system, the distant sound of his mother's voice from the kitchen above the lab, too far to make out words but unmistakably her. He went ghost, fully, the transformation complete, white hair and green eyes and the black and white suit, through all of it, not because he needed to for the portal crossing, but because it was the honest form, both halves, neither hidden. He stepped through. The portal sealed behind him with the soft precision of Strange's finest dimensional work. Clean, complete, leaving no trace in the Marvel Universe's membrane except for the reference point stone in Danny's pocket and the faint ectoplasmic resonance that would persist in Kamar-Taj's courtyard for months. The specific frequency of a ghost zone entity that had been genuinely, structurally present here and had left its mark the way all real things do. In the sanctum's courtyard, the cloak of levitation settled back onto Strange's shoulders and was still. In the decommissioned shield facility upstate, the territorial ghost held its claimed space and watched the reinforced membrane and thought about what it meant to choose a place, rather than simply claim it. In Amity Park, and in the basement of Fenton Works, Danny Phantom landed on the lab floor and went human before his feet fully touched the ground. The reflex of 2 years of secret identity, smooth and automatic, and stood in the familiar green-lit chaos of his parents' laboratory and listened to his mother's voice from the kitchen and the hum of the equipment and the specific sound of a universe that ran on different rules than the one he'd spent 8 days in. Tucker found him 11 minutes later, running down the lab stairs at a speed that suggested he'd been watching the secondary portal's dimensional sensors since the moment Danny had disappeared and had been doing so continuously for however long it had been on this side. Sam was directly behind him, and the expression on her face was the specific combination of relief and fury that she deployed when she'd been frightened for someone and had processed the fear into something more actionable. 8 days, Tucker said. 8 days, Danny confirmed. 8 days in a different universe, and you come back looking... Tucker looked at him, scanning, the tech guy's instinct to assess for damage. Mostly fine. You look mostly fine. I am mostly fine, Danny said. Mostly, Sam said, the word carrying exactly the weight she intended it to carry. It's a long story, Danny said. We have time, Sam said. Start from the beginning. Danny looked at his 2 best friends. Tucker with his tablet already out. Sam with her arms crossed and her attention fully present, both of them exactly who they'd always been. The constants that had made 2 years of impossible things possible. He thought about the courtyard. About Sam Wilson's "You're not alone here." About what it looked like to protect something with people rather than just being the person who did it. And about a territorial ghost that had turned back instead of running and had held a dimensional membrane through a pressure wave because it had made a promise and had decided to keep it. He pulled up a stool. He sat down. He started from the beginning. Upstairs, his parents' voices moved through the ordinary rhythms of their morning. Unaware that their son had spent 8 days in a universe of superheroes and had come home knowing something he hadn't known before. Not about ghost physics or dimensional architecture or the mechanics of rift closure, but about the specific gravity of being met as what you actually are. About the weight of a room that reorganizes itself around your expertise without making you feel like a specimen. So about the long distance between doing something alone because there's no other option and choosing to do it differently. He was going to need time to understand what to do with it. He was going to need Sam and Tucker's help because he needed their help with everything that mattered, and this mattered more than most things. But the compass point was there. The stark fragment stone was in his pocket, warm against the living universe physics that surrounded it now, a humming in a frequency that only Danny's ghost sense could detect. A piece of one universe carried into another, the specific warmth of something real that had happened in a place that was now far away. He would go back to protecting Amity Park. He would keep going ghost when the ghost sense triggered, keep fighting the fights that needed fighting, keep being the thing that stood between his town and the ghost zone's overflow. All of that was the same. But he would do it knowing that somewhere in a universe accessible by a reference point stone and a sorcerer's careful mathematics, a courtyard existed where people had assembled at 6 in the morning because his departure mattered to them. Knowing that the cloak of levitation had patted him on the shoulder with the deliberate gentleness of something that had decided he was worth being careful with. And knowing that a territorial ghost had turned back from running and had held something that mattered because he'd asked it to. as one ghost to another, knowing, in the specific, bone-deep way that only experience could produce, not the theoretical understanding of a principle, but the lived weight of the thing itself. That alone was a circumstance, not a permanent condition. So that the strongest thing he'd ever done in 2 years of ghost fighting hadn't been the ghostly whale or the ectoskeleton or any of the moments where power had been the answer. It had been asking for help and meaning it. It had been letting the backup be backup. It had been standing in a courtyard and saying, "I don't know how to do this with people yet," and having everyone in earshot decide that "yet" was the most important word in the sentence. He talked for 3 hours. Tucker took notes. Sam asked the questions that needed asking, which were different from the questions Tucker asked, and together covered everything. The secondary portal hummed at the edge of the lab, its dimensional sensors returning the clean, stable readings of a ghost zone membrane in normal condition. No bleed-through, no pressure waves, nothing coming through that wasn't supposed to. For now, Amity Park was quiet. And Danny Phantom had come back from the impossible and brought something home with him that no ghost scanner could measure and no ectoplasmic analysis could quantify. The simple, fundamental knowledge that the world was larger than Amity Park and full of people who, given the chance, would show up in a courtyard at 6 in the morning for a kid they'd known for 8 days, because that was what it looked like when people who understood the job actually did it. He'd carry that with him. And into every ghost fight, into every moment, the weight of it got heavy enough to make alone feel like the only option. He'd carry it, and when the time came, and it would come, because it always came, he'd put it down in front of the people who mattered and say, "I need help with this." Not because he couldn't do it alone, because he'd learned what it felt like to not have to. And the ghost who walked between 2 worlds came home changed. And the world he'd promised to protect would never quite be the same for it. He was 14 years old, half human, half ghost, and 11 dimensional layers from home. And the Marvel Universe had absolutely no idea what to do with him. When a ghost zone portal accident tears Danny Phantom through a multiverse fracture and drops him into the middle of Manhattan, the Avengers face a threat their instruments can't measure, who their containment protocols can't hold, and their categories can't classify. Danny Phantom reads as simultaneously alive and dead, human and extra-dimensional. And when Sword's scanners return, nothing but errors and the TVA's pruning charge can't make contact. Everyone has to accept that the rules they've built their world around don't have a slot for a 14-year-old ghost hero from Amity Park. But something followed him through the rift. Something ancient, vast, and moving through the deep regions of the ghost zone. And it's pushing every ghost in its path into the Marvel Universe through 17 compromised membrane locations. With the ghost zone's dimensional layer destabilizing across Earth 616 and a force of nature approaching the boundary between worlds, the Avengers have to do something they've never done before. Follow the lead of a kid who knows this enemy, and they don't. What follows is the story of Danny Phantom navigating a universe of gods, sorcerers, and cosmic threats with 2 years of ghost fighting experience, one passive intangibility power that makes containment impossible, and the specific exhaustion of someone who has been the only line of defense for a town that doesn't fully know it needs defending. It's the story of what happens when the most powerful heroes on Earth meet someone who learned to fight alone and is slowly, reluctantly, not learning what it means to not have to. It's the story of a territorial ghost that ran from something enormous and turned back. And it's the story of what gets left behind when a half-ghost kid from a different universe goes home, and what he carries with him. Danny Phantom came to the Marvel Universe by accident. He left it changed on purpose. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.